Thank you for joining today. I'm going to start with a brief introduction. My name is Calvin Goyeron. I'm Director of the Cloud and Infrastructure Services practice at RAND Group. I've been with RAND Group almost 3 years. I have about 18 years of experience supporting on-premise and cloud infrastructure. My focus has been on Microsoft technologies, cloud platforms, high availability, and business continuity throughout my career. At RAND Group, our mission is to help people use technology for business success. And today we hope that after watching this screencast, you'll be more prepared to use cloud in order to leverage the technology to push your organization forward and continue to be competitive. And we are here to help with that process of understanding and giving you some insight on how you can leverage cloud technologies. Going to start with the agenda. Our first section is going to be understanding the cloud. We're also going to get some perspective on why cloud is important today. I'm going to talk specifically about the Microsoft Cloud, which is Microsoft Azure and Office 365. Also going to touch on security in the cloud. And then finally we will finish with a demo going through the Azure portal, talking a little bit about ERP in the cloud, and getting a better perspective on what those look like today. So, in terms of understanding the cloud and how big its presence is today, these are just some statistics out there that give you a perspective on where cloud is making an impact in the marketplace. A lot of organizations have struggled, especially in the small and medium-sized arena, in terms of getting technology deployed in their organization and doing it in a way that is stable, redundant, cost-effective. And I think that's part of why cloud technologies are emerging. That has a lot to do with economies of scale, being able to leverage something that's already built and not having to reinvent the wheel. As you can see, 80% of organizations saw an improvement in the technologies that they were using after deploying the solution in the cloud. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different platforms that have existed over the years. Some of you may remember kind of that first platform of mainframe and terminal, those green screens that you would see in a lot of organizations in the past, and some that still exist today because they either haven't made the next step to move forward, or it's too cost prohibitive to do anything with the system. But that's kind of that first, what we call the first platform. Second platform is what most of you would be used to. This is kind of a LAN SAN scenario with a client and a server. Some of you may be familiar with using an Access database or using a SQL database with an Access form. Typical SQL server and then front-end client. That would just be a basic representation of that, but many applications out there over the years have worked in this kind of, you've got a server on the LAN, you have a client, and they're on the LAN, and it's pulling data back and forth, either modifying data, inserting data, whatever it may be. And then you have what we're calling the third platform now. This third platform consists of things like cloud, mobility, data analytics, BI, and social business. All of these areas are coming together, providing a more mobile experience for the workforce, providing immense amounts of ability to process large data sets, to get new information that can give organizations a competitive lead in their market space. All of these are tools that we're going to talk about today that can be leveraged in the Microsoft Azure cloud, that can be leveraged in Office 365 and across the Dynamics platform. So what is cloud computing? Broken it up in three different areas here, as I see it, as RAND Group sees it. You have kind of the on-premise scenario where you've bought your own hardware, you manage it in your own data center or in somebody else's data center, but essentially it's your equipment, you paid for it, you're managing it, you're responsible for it. Hosted scenario is more of a situation where you don't have to pay up for the hardware up front, but you're paying a monthly fee, and likely somebody is managing it, but maybe you're getting in and managing that hardware too. Less control, but you have fewer responsibilities and maybe not that lower upfront capital expense. And then there's cloud. So cloud is more of a pay-as-you-go model. It's already built, it's already out there for you to use. Typically, it can be a SaaS solution where there's multi-tenant. In the case of an infrastructure as service solution, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that is multi-tenant, but at the hardware layer, inside of the middle layer, that is very dedicated to you, and not as much of a multi-tenant scenario. The great thing about cloud, which we'll continue to talk about, is the ability to scale across those resources without dedicating them at first. So scaling on demand. So, as you probably have heard in the marketplace, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS or SaaS kind of turns into a little bit of alphabet soup when you're looking at it on the page. And so we wanted to talk about this, give you a better understanding so you can be better prepared to make decisions and understand what infrastructure as a service means, what platform as a service means, and what software as a service means. So traditional IT, this is really that on-premise scenario, right? So you're responsible for the applications, the data, the runtime, the middleware, the OS, the virtualization layer, the servers, the storage. You're responsible for everything that's on that bare metal, including the bare metal itself. So in an infrastructure as a service solution, you remove that responsibility of the hardware. You still have to deal with the operating systems, from maintenance to patches. You still have your middleware, runtime, data, and applications. You're essentially managing everything from the operating system up and not having to worry about everything below that, which typically is the kind of the expensive and difficult overhead that you would have to deal with in a traditional IT scenario. In a platform as a service scenario, you remove even more of those layers, and you're essentially now just dealing with software that will allow you to build applications, store your data, and leverage an existing platform to run on, so that you're not having to manage everything underneath your data and the application that you've built. And in a software as service scenario, that's where pretty much everything is done for you. You're simply using the software in the cloud. It's maintained for you. Updates are occurring. You're just simply using the application, extracting your data, putting your data in. If you're familiar with Office 365 or CRM Online, this is very much a software as service type scenario. So I wanted to talk a little bit about managed services, because I think it does play in here, whether it's a traditional IT scenario or an infrastructure as a service scenario. There's maintenance that has to be done and has to be considered when going in these directions. Obviously, in a scenario with an infrastructure as service uh, product, you really are taking about half of the responsibility out of the equation, from having to monitor, do maintenance, and have incidents and requests related to the virtualization server, storage, networking area that you would normally have to deal with in a traditional IT environment. Managed services is typically a term that's used when you're in a scenario where you don't want to have to manage those, but you're still responsible for those aspects. And in those cases, it would likely be around kind of a traditional IT scenario and an infrastructure as service scenario. So just this slide is really just highlighting some of the cloud services that are out there today. Most of you are probably familiar with at least one of these, and may or may not be using them today. So why cloud? Why are we talking about cloud? Why is cloud a big buzzword in the industry today, and has been for several years? I think a lot of organizations have realized that building for peak consumption, building for the peak performance is maybe not the most cost-effective scenario. If you underbuild, your performance is going to be impacted. If you overbuild, resources are going to be wasted. On-premise scenarios are typically a static design. And in some cases, if you have enough invested in the environment, you can scale those pieces of hardware, but it's not on demand. There's still some effort that needs to be done there, provisioning, putting together a requisition, getting the hardware approved, getting the hardware delivered, installed, configured, tested. So all of those things make up a static type design in an on-premise scenario. Infrastructure in general, if you talk about the infrastructure in a traditional IT scenario, it's expensive to maintain. Those applications, and if you think about email or ERP or any of those critical business applications, those applications need to have constant power. The hardware underneath them have to have proper cooling, and connectivity has to be available so that those applications are available not only on-premise but for your remote employees or employees that may be at a client site or on vacation and needing to get in for some sort of emergency. Support and maintenance costs are also a consideration, not only with all that hardware that you have deployed as a support and maintenance cost associated with it, but in the case of the power and cooling and connectivity, there's maintenance costs associated with that. And along with all of those things of running your own data center or infrastructure on premise comes with the need for additional skill sets, and that means a higher cost for the staff that are managing that environment. Another concern that is something that the cloud is working in the marketplace to make easier to understand and deliver solutions that provide a more end-to-end solution is disaster recovery. Disaster recovery has been complex for some time. Virtualization made it a little bit easier, but still there are a lot of moving pieces and different parts of technology that have to be considered even outside of the business continuity process, just inside of disaster recovery itself, that has to be taken under consideration. It's expensive to implement on-premise disaster recovery. Often we find in our IT assessments at Rand Group that these solutions are untested or they're not current. Often those secondary resources that are used for disaster recovery are limited and not up to the same scale that the primary resource is at, and can be slow to recovery. So, we've talked about kind of the negative aspects of doing things on premise and why people are looking at the cloud, but we also want to make sure that you understand that cloud that cloud is not all, that there are some concerns. So we've talked about all the negative aspects of doing things on premise and why somebody might want to move to the cloud, why people are talking about the cloud. But I want to make sure that we're balanced here and showing some of the other sides, some of the things in cloud that you need to be concerned and need to ask questions about. And some of the, cloud solutions can be expensive, so you need to look at how you're spending your dollars in a cloud solution and whether or not it makes sense to move a solution to the cloud. Not all solutions make sense to move to the cloud, especially depending on your specific scenario in terms of where your organization resides, what type of building you're in, what type of connectivity you have. If you have a scenario where you're in a remote location and connectivity is hard to come by, it may not make sense to put your ERP in the cloud. If you don't have a solid connectivity or a redundant connectivity solution to get to those applications. One thing to also remember in the cloud, don't assume that your data is backed up. You need to be asking questions. How is my data backed up? How will I retrieve this data if something were to happen in this cloud scenario? And get a clear picture of the service level agreement. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's going to be up all the time. There have been some major cloud outages, and you need to understand what the service level agreement is to get your applications back online and how you need to make accommodations for that in your business. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Azure. So Microsoft Azure is really made a big effort to move organizations forward and giving them a platform where they can get solutions built and deployed and scaled in a very short amount of time. 57% of the Fortune 500 companies are using Microsoft Azure in one way or another. And this could be for deploying dev and test resources. This could be for deploying disaster recovery resources. A lot of people are getting into Azure because of its benefits, because of its ability to scale on demand, and because of the disaster recovery efficiencies that are built into the product. So what is Microsoft Azure? Microsoft Azure is an infrastructure as service solution. It's also a platform as service solution. So as we were talking about the alphabet soup, these are the areas where, in infrastructure as service, you're not having to deal with the hardware anymore, but you still have the operating system, the virtual machine, the applications that are running on those virtual servers. You basically have an ability to manage everything from the virtualization layer up. In the platform as a service layer, this is where you basically are given a platform that you can develop on, and that platform may be a web server and a database server, and you're just building code so that you can run a website. That would be an example of a platform as a service scenario. Microsoft has deployed 18 data centers worldwide that support Azure. So this means if you deploy your application, you have a choice to deploy that application or that set of virtual machines in 18 data centers worldwide. And that in itself provides for a variety of disaster recovery solutions that can occur and can be deployed when working with Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure is essentially storage, network, and compute power. You have all the resources there to build an infrastructure, and those are some of the core resources required to build out application services in the platform as a service, and then also to build out virtual machines in the infrastructure as a service segment. And again, this capacity on the demand. No longer are you having to build for peak. If you only have 100 users today, but 3 months from now you're going to have 500, you can scale up. You don't have to buy all that hardware day one. You can scale up as you need to scale, assuming your application supports it. Some of the additional benefits of using Microsoft Azure would be not having that large upfront capital investment that you would have to make in a normal on-premise scenario where you're trying to build out maybe a private cloud infrastructure or just bringing up a couple servers to be able to host your business critical applications. In a Microsoft Azure scenario, you essentially would pay on a monthly basis for the operating system licenses and the virtual server compute power that you're using, or in the case of a platform as a service, you'd be paying for the transactions that you're using, which is obviously going to be significantly less in an upfront scenario than it would be to build out your own servers to host those applications on. And obviously giving you that ability to scale as your business grows, and then mitigating business risk by becoming more agile. So, not putting a bunch of maybe early funding that you have for a project into hardware, but instead saving that for maybe other aspects of the project. Obviously paying for what you need when you need it. That's that scaling on demand. If you're only using 2 virtual machines today, but you're only going to pay for 2 virtual machines today, but next week you could use 10 if you needed to. Depending on where you are in the country. In the case of Houston, Texas, we're obviously impacted by natural disasters like hurricanes, and those hurricanes bring flooding and loss of power. Deploying into the Azure cloud, you have the ability to not only deploy into a data center that may not be impacted as much by a natural disaster, but you have the ability to deploy into multiple data centers, further mitigating your risk as it pertains to natural disasters. You have fully managed options working with Microsoft partners. That Azure account can be managed and the environment can be managed. Not only do you not have to deal with the hardware, but you also don't have to deal with the systems themselves. And you can have a partner like RAN Group assist you with managing that environment. These resources can integrate with on-premise solutions using site-to-site tunnels and MPLS connectivity into Azure through their ExpressRoute product. So essentially, Azure can be an extension of an already existing infrastructure with very limited required expense to extend your infrastructure into Azure. Microsoft has invested billions into making Azure number one. They are at this point, with an enterprise agreement in Azure, you can ensure that Microsoft is going to beat the rates of its competitors. That you can make a decision that, based on the fact that you like the Microsoft Azure platform and that you're not going to overpay for the resources in terms of some of the competitors that are out there today. The Microsoft stack fully integrates with Azure and the Office 365 platforms. This means that Active Directory is extended into Azure. This means that all of the Windows operating systems that are currently supported are in the Microsoft Azure environment, available to be provisioned, within minutes. Some of the considerations, like I said, I want to give you a balanced view of these topics that we're going over today. One thing that we work with our clients on is to make sure that they're not over-provisioning the resources in Azure. If you only need 2 CPUs on a virtual machine in Azure, and you provision 6 CPUs, you're essentially wasting funds because you're going to be charged for those 6 CPUs. But if your systems are not using those resources, then there's no point in paying for them. So we help our clients go in and make sure that they're utilizing the resources that they're utilizing inside of Azure, and that they're not overpaying for resources that they're not using. One of the ways that we help them do this is, in a lot of cases, dev and test systems do not need to be online after hours. So we've worked with our clients to build automation so that these systems can be turned off. And in the case of Azure, when systems are turned off, you're only paying for the storage. You're not paying for the compute power that you would normally pay for, which is the most expensive part of using resources in Azure is that in the infrastructure as a service side is using the CPU, using the memory. And when those resources are turned off, you're paying for just the storage. So why not turn these systems off at night and save on where your spend is? One thing that we'd like to do with our clients is review their consumption quarterly. Let's make sure that there aren't any I won't say rogue VMs, but maybe some VMs that they forgot were out there that are still turned on and maybe aren't being used anymore. Maybe there are ways that they can leverage turning services off after hours. Or maybe there are VMs that need to be lowered at the level of resources that they have so that when they are running, they're not wasting resources from a consumption level. We also need to make sure that the data is being backed up. So like I said, in a previous slide, the concept of moving to cloud does not encompass the fact that your data is going to be backed up. You still need to ask where your data is being backed up, still need to make sure that it's getting backed up. It's no different than an on-premise scenario, other than that there are probably more options for where you can store that backup easily. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Office 365. I think Office 365 has been out long enough in the market for organizations to at least have some exposure, whether it's in a professional environment or maybe even in a home environment. And I think there's a lot to be leveraged with Office 365 going forward. So Gartner is predicting that 33% of businesses will adopt a cloud-based solution by 2017. Rand Group is seeing this today. You know, in probably a daily occurrence, I'm talking to a client that is either looking at moving to Office 365, is already on the path to moving to Office 365. So I wouldn't doubt that percentage is even higher in some of the market, at least in the area with the clients that we're dealing with, which typically are in the Microsoft stack scenario. So what is Office 365? So going back to that software as service term that we talked about, it is software that's all ready for you to use, for you to put your data in, for to not have to worry about installing patches and keeping up with the hardware. It's there out on the internet waiting for you. To get more specific, it's hosted Exchange. And what is Exchange? So Exchange is, typically more often than not, the email server that's sitting behind the Outlook client, the Microsoft Outlook client. And going into kind of the next level of what Office 365 is around Office licenses is something that is often misunderstood or maybe confused with some of the other solutions that are out there. So what Office 365 means from an Microsoft Office perspective doesn't mean that you can just use your Office in the cloud. It actually is a full licensed copy of Office, Microsoft Office, that you've all been used to, that can be installed on many devices, your desktop, your mobile phone, your tablet, and it works just like you remember Office working, at least from a desktop scenario. Yes, there are some assets online that you can use in an online scenario, but that Microsoft Office 365 license should be considered very similar in a way to the Office suite that you're used to. Office 365 is also SharePoint Online, which is a great collaboration platform for knowledge management and document management. And then Skype for Business is a great collaboration platform for corporate instant messaging and collaboration using screen shares and voice and conference calls, more formally known as Link in its previous name, and has most recently been updated to Skype for Business. So some of the benefits of Office 365 include enterprise email with no on-premise infrastructure required. That means that your email is going to be up regardless of what the power situation is in your office, regardless of what the weather situation is. Your email is going to be available for you and your employees and your peers. So the latest versions of Office are also included with Office 365, as well as the latest versions of Exchange and SharePoint. So this means no longer are you going to have to be tasked, or your IT group is going to have to be tasked with keeping these applications up to date. They will stay current with the new enhancements that Microsoft is bringing online, and they'll be available at your fingertips, very quickly and rapidly throughout the lifecycle of the product. Office 365 also offers superior spam protection. As many people know, over the years, spam has been a challenge for both IT groups and the industry, and Microsoft is able to do this on a huge scale and gain efficiencies, and then also offering mobile access to all of this. Additionally, by moving to Office 365, you're going to decrease that burden on your IT staff and infrastructure. A lot of ways, Office 365 has become a stepping stone for organizations moving into the cloud. They've moved to Office 365 and they've seen the benefits of removing this burden from their IT staff as well as some of their infrastructure costs, and have started now to say, hey, let's go to the next level. Let's see what Azure has to offer. As a reduced cost of ownership, this means that is more often than not a more cost-effective solution to move to Office 365 than to try and do SharePoint, Exchange, and the other product suite offerings on-premise. Trying to run those applications and keep them maintained is expensive, and Office 365 reduces that cost for you. And then, of course, disaster recovery being built into the technology. Some of the considerations moving forward with Office 365 would be compliance systems that need to be deployed. So if you have a system or a reason why all of your emails need to be copied into another location for archival purposes, these systems are out there, but they're not part of out-of-the-box solution with Office 365, so you need to keep that in mind in terms of the investment that you're going to make. If you have an investment in modern versions of Office licenses, you need to consider that as well. If you move to Office 365, doesn't mean that you need to do Exchange, which is email, as well as the Office suite. You can actually break it up into different types of licenses to make it more cost effective if you're still trying to decide what parts of Office 365 you're going to use. And this goes into considering a hybrid deployment. We've had organizations that work with us and say, hey, I want to get into Office 365, but I'm not sure where to start, and I've just made an investment with my Office licenses. So we'll work with those organizations that maybe have wanted to use SharePoint or Link and now Skype for Business, but haven't had the resources on premise to build out those environments or manage them. We've worked with them to deploy those solutions into the cloud in Office 365, getting them up and running a lot quicker than they would trying to build those solutions on premise, and possibly for a lot lower cost a lot lower return on investment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about security in the cloud. Some of the things that you should be concerned about, some of the questions that you should be asking, really preparing you for that next step to moving an application or an infrastructure into the cloud. On this slide, you can see several organizations that have something in common. And all of these organizations have in common the fact that they had a major security breach in the last year. And none of these were specific to a cloud scenario. The way I look at this is whether it's in a cloud environment or if it's an on-premise environment, a lot of the same questions need to be asked. For example, how is identity and access controlled? How do I know that the person that should have access to a specific set of data is the only person that has access to that? And how is that controlled? Is my data and how is my data encrypted? Whether it's on premise or in the cloud, you still have similar risks. Find out how that data is being encrypted. What's being done for threat management? Whether you're in the cloud or on premise, threats are all around us. There can be threats from equipment that a user is bringing into your environment, or maybe a threat from your external firewall. There can be threats from just random scans that are being done across the internet all day long. How is that threat being dealt with? How is it being managed? And that's the same, like I said, on premise or in the cloud. Is monitoring and logging in place? Is there an ability to go back and find out what happened if there was some sort of a security event, that incident that took place? And then ultimately, is penetration testing occurring? And again, all of these need to be done in the cloud, on premise, no matter where your environment is being hosted. These are things that you need to be considering from a security perspective. On-premise security is an area that I wanted to discuss because I think it's a good contrast to a cloud scenario. Physical security, often as we see them in our assessments, is minimal. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization, walked right past their server room, and the door was open, and there was no other type of security preventing somebody from walking into that room. Often edge technology is protecting the edge, so this may be a firewall device or some sort of security device on the edge. As IT budgets become more constrained, these are the types of things that can fall behind and be out of date in terms of patching and software. Distributed denial of service attacks. On-premise, it's really hard to protect yourself from a distributed denial of service attack. And then ultimately, do you know where your backup tapes are? Or do you know where your backups are in case maybe you're not backing up to tape? But maybe you should be backing up to tape. More often than not, we find backup tapes or backup solutions either in the back of a trunk somewhere for one of the individuals on an IT department's team, or that the backups aren't working. All of these things are things that you need to consider in an on-premise scenario. Some of the security certifications out there you should be aware of. Microsoft most recently received a cloud security certification from the ISO organization, and the 27018 certification ensures that processes and procedures are in place to protect personal identifiable information that is stored in the cloud. There are other certifications on this list that are, regardless of whether it's in the cloud or on-premise, that need to be taken into consideration depending on what type of business you're in and what type of data you're storing. Now we're going to move into the demo portion of this screencast. We're going to review the Azure portal. I'm going to show you how easy it is to navigate, how easy it is to create a virtual server and start leveraging those Azure resources that are out there, and show you metrics on the server that give you an idea of how you're utilizing that consumption. I'm also going to go over the Office 365 portal, show how easy it is to download the Office suite, list user accounts, and log into a SharePoint Online instance that is out in the environment. So what I have in front of me is the Azure portal. I simply went to portal.azure.com and logged in with my credentials. If I did not already have a subscription up and running, I'd be prompted for my credit card, and I could create a subscription on the fly. I immediately have access to these resources to be able to create virtual machines, add SQL databases. I can deploy other cloud services, high availability, MySQL databases. If it's from a technology asset and it has something to do with providing resources for applications and users, you likely can leverage that in the Microsoft Azure cloud. So going into virtual machines, you can see we have a list of virtual machines here. Some of them are stopped and deallocated. The machines that are stopped and deallocated mean that we're not getting charged for consumption, that we're simply getting charged for storage. And that is a big a big benefit to an organization that may not need resources running at night. They can cut their costs down by just having the resources turned on during the day. And all of this can be automated based on a time schedule. So going into one of the existing VMs that we have out there, I can see the DNS name, the machine name. I can see what data source. I can see what data center the VM is located in. In this case, it's located in the South Central Data Center, which is closest to us here in Houston. I can reset a password. I can send a new support request. Everything that I would need to do from an infrastructure perspective to manage this server is at my fingertips. If I wanted to connect to this virtual machine, I would simply click connect. Let's say that this virtual machine has an application on it, and this application needs to access a SQL database. Instead of building another SQL database virtual machine, I can actually use the platform as a service part of Azure, click add, and create my SQL database without having to go through the trouble of building out a SQL server. Let's go ahead and create a virtual machine and show you how easy it is to get started. So one of the benefits of working in Azure is all of the assets that are already in Azure from a virtual machine perspective. I've got all my base images for Windows. I've got appliances or other images that have software already installed on them from other software vendors in the world. In our case, we're just going to create a Windows Server VM. I'm going to choose Windows Server 2012 R2. Going to give it a host name. Going to give it an administrator password and username. Going to choose my pricing tier, and the pricing tiers have to do with what type of consumption I'm expecting out of this VM. These are some of the recommended pricing tiers, but you can also go under View All and get a whole list of different configuration options depending on what your requirements are. So in this case, I'm going to just pick one of the recommended configurations. I'm then going to change the data center that I'm located in, that this VM will be located in, and I'm simply going to click Create. This VM will be available for us to use within the next 10 minutes. We'll be able to log in, deploy our applications, do whatever we need with that VM to leverage the resource we've just created. So now we're going to move into Office 365. So when I log into Office 365, as an administrator, or even as a user in this case, I'll be presented with something similar that I have in front of me. I can click Install, and this screen will allow me to leverage and install Office 2013 or Office 2016. And this would be a full install on my machine. Let's say I wanted to install Office on my iPad or my Windows Phone. I have those options here as well. So going into the admin portal, if I was an admin and I was managing this account, I could see all the services that are available here, and in terms of how they are from a health perspective and any planned maintenance that's going to occur. If I wanted to create an account, I could come in here and go under active users and create an account. If I wanted to see some billing information or look at some of the specifics to my Exchange environment, I can do that all from the portal here. No longer do I have to log into multiple servers, multiple interfaces, and manage those assets. I can do it all from a web interface, from any machine that I have access from. Let's say I want to go out and see all the SharePoint environments that I have set up. Simply log into the SharePoint Admin Center. And from here, I can pick any one of these sites to either manage or log into or do anything that I need to from a SharePoint perspective. Going up to the top, I can try out the new admin portal for Office 365. You can see this portal is a little bit easier to manage and navigate. I've got my billing, my apps, my health. I can create a user here. I can delete a user, reset a password. All of this in relation to email services and corporate IM communication and so forth. So we're going to go back into Azure and see how our VMs are doing. You can see our VM was created here. We can connect to this VM. We can reset the password. We have a whole suite of options that we can choose from. So I just want to say thank you for joining this screencast. I hope the information that you have reviewed today with us on this screencast will help you make better decisions in leveraging cloud technologies. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My name is Calvin Gorayaran. You can email me at calvin@randgroup.com. Thank you.